Someone give a shout out, someone is up here behind me. Thanks.
Oh, yes, oh, no, sorry.
Is that my?
Cross off. It's not on me, he's not showing you. And more.
Oh, we'll continue on anyway. So there's no one in the public forum, no petitions, so we'll just move to the confirmation of the minutes of last meeting. Thanks very much, Eric, for running that. I struggled, but I'll move the minutes. Thanks. Eric moves the minutes. Seconder, any discussion on those at all? Okay, so all in favour? All right, it's against, carried. Rightio. Any extraordinary or urgent business? Okay. Move to number 7, questions. None's been put forward to me anyway. Initial questions. Any chairman and councillor reports? Really good opportunity this morning to read strategy and policy. It's quite a bit of crossover, isn't there? So, none of those. Rightio. Well, that will get us into number 9, which is the general manager management report. So we've got quite a few items there, I think, lined up. We've got 9 items lined up. So what we'll do is we'll get into the first one, and that's the Bluff Biosecurity Haul-Out project update. So
yeah, I'll just introduce this. This has been a paper that's been requested for a number of occasions, but we've put together as best an update that we can in terms of the work that we've done today. But notwithstanding that, we will probably need to come back more as regular as possible, because as you will get through the report, there's still some conversations and work to be had. But you can take it from me as the general manager responsible for supporting this committee that we will have a regular Bluff update, because I know it's a key priority for this particular council and other partners and stakeholders. So I'll hand over to Nick.
Thank you. For you, I'll take the paper as read, but really this acknowledges that there has been a bit of a time gap since when this first sort of started, and there was a bit of a loss of momentum, but you know, we're trying to get that momentum back up and running. So overall we're working on a bit of a partnership working with Southport at the moment, and I'm very passionate about being on board with this. I think, and then part of that is looking at how do we actually build a business model around how this operates. So we've got to investigate all these things. But so the next sort of steps that we're looking at is a bit of an updated needs analysis. Where does this sit out there? Considering that it's been sort of 5 years, that the time may have changed in terms of the needs that are required out there. So we've got to make sure that we're doing this for the right reasons. There's a lot of considerations which we sort of started forming a bit of a list there around what are some of the considerations we need to take into play. Yeah. Other than that, motion, any questions?
Nickel.
Okay. A couple of comments, I guess, at least, the way it's looking at, we are targeting vessels that are probably moored in the ports, so they're not small trailer ones, which tend to be low risk because they're out in the air and it's likely to have an issue. The single lift, there's the one here, I don't think there's one in Otago. I think part of the issue is that between the two regions, there's only the one. But obviously, there is a real need for those vessels to be able to be pulled out and cleaned in an environmentally safe way. Some of those pictures there, there's a transfer slab wash thing there somewhere. I assume that's just a sort of a simple washing thing for possibly smaller boats. But, and land appears to be an issue. It'd be great if we can get something up and running and then see if we can source the funding between Southport and the other interested parties, because until we've got something, we're not going to solve the
No.
So probably a bit of context, Nick. It was probably the view historically that the existing Syncrolift and haul out was not available.
Yes.
And maybe the views of, our operational efficiencies have meant that now may not be the case. I wonder if you just want to explain some of the thinking. It's not, some of the thinking around that.
Yeah, so some of the, through the discussions with Southport, they back at the time took on board the feedback around the lack of availability or accessibility, I should say, and they've since invested in quite a robust business model around the operations of the Syncrolift per se, in terms of extending the life of the Syncrolift. So they've actually seen a big increase. They've seen a decrease in the concerns out there around the
Just for clarification, the issue before wasn't so much the availability, but it could be 3 or 4 months waiting list.
Yes. So that was the accessibility side of things. So they've addressed that through a bit of a way they charge as well. So before it was actually a cheap way of storing the boat. So that we acknowledge that. So that's one of the things that we looked at. So how that actually works. And in terms of the land down there is a bit of room to expand that operation to incorporate an extra berth or the like. So we're exploring those options at the moment.
So I was going to ask on that room for expansion. We've got quite an ambitious agricultural down there industry wanting to get going. Have we got the growth and that facility there to accommodate them? And should we be looking to them and seeing their needs too?
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we've put here as a consideration, and we need to incorporate in that future plan of attack is, there is that growing agriculture. What does that look like in the future? What is their demand on this? And that can be incorporated.
The contribution.
Yeah, exactly.
Morris, question.
That's raised that I think of all the years that this has been going, I don't know how many years it has been talked about, certainly a lot. Funding of it seems to be the biggest stumbling block, as far as I can recall. Everybody wants it. We see the need for it. You talk about at the bottom there of funding usually requires 25% contribution from council. We might get some money from Kanoa. So can you enlighten us any further? Is there any commitment from other councils or Southport or anybody else to help with the funding of this?
Not at this stage. So this is the early stage of those discussions, but yes.
So it's probably worth saying that funding, looking at this in a wide sense, it's probably not clear just to say we're looking at, Kanoa have got particular funding streams that we could look at, but we're looking at wider funding as well. So we're not ruling out. We're not just focusing on one funding stream, and obviously part of this will be looking at our own LTP as well in terms of maybe council's own contribution and others. So the funding component is an ongoing piece of work that we're going to explore quite thoroughly.
There hasn't been much progress in that area, though, really, has there?
No.
Got Gail, I think, has got the hand up there online, and then we've got Lyndall to follow for a question. Gail?
Kia ora koutou. I've got a couple of comments more than questions. And I mean, this has been going on, you're right, for a long time. Our fishermen not only need this facility and services for their surveys, etc., which is part of the problem. But what I'm want to ask about, we're talking about the Maritime Museum car park, and from an aesthetic point of view, you know, what would that look like for the museum? And we're also talking about the smaller recreational vessels. Well, I can assure you that there's up to 120 of those vessels along the trailers parked along the foreshore on any given nice day. So we need to be able to track what's happening there as well. What else? In terms of funding, I think we need funding. It needs to happen. As fishermen and Southport, they've been talking about it for at least 5 years, and nothing's happened. It needs to, a paper needs to be developed with all the number crunching and everything done, because this is a must do. Otherwise, all the time and effort that's been put into the protection of Fiordland is going to be a waste of time. Kia ora.
Thanks, Gail. Lyndall?
Yeah, strikes me as there are many government agencies that need to be numerically invested in this facility, because it covers off a whole lot of different biosecurity and biodiversity and marine safety and lots of things. So government funding should be forthcoming, I would think. But not only we can build a fantastic facility, but we have to run it. And so the ongoing business case for how that facility will operate and who will fund the ongoing costs are almost more important. Because I've seen many times public money go into a fantastic facility and then you're scrambling to even turn the lights on. So a really long-term view of how this all the invested and vested interests can contribute to the ongoing. And just logistically, how you operate a facility like this when Gail's talking about 120 trailers on the foreshore. So sorry, not a question. Having to do that this morning, but,
and those matters are really to be worked through for the next update of this, because you know, yeah, it's one thing to build the thing, it's another thing to operate it, and I'm not at this stage clear on who would be best placed to operate it yet. And stuff. So those all have to be worked through, along with costings and
I wouldn't
locations.
suggest that it necessarily would be our facility to run.
No,
Anyway.
no.
Outside our business scope, I would think. Anyway.
We've got a few questions lined up for Elle and Estelle, and then Nicole, and then we might just move on to another item. So else.
For the less informed people of this outfit, me being one, can you just explain the diagram we've got there? Where things might fit and what might be there? Because I see repair berth 1, repair berth 2. That's just what's there now.
That's yeah. So on the right hand side there, you can see that's the actual sinker lift itself, right above the repair berth 1 and 2. So that's where the boat gets lifted out of the water. Then it goes on a cradle, which then sort of goes on a little rail thing and can be moved to any of these other areas. So there's the sheds and the couple of berths and things like that they have there.
So they can be taken across to Haven Shed 1, 2.
And even down to the Real Journeys one as well.
Right.
Yep.
And worked on.
So in brief,
They're all funded.
all right.
Like, we're not going to have all that stuff coming back into.
No, well, this is part of the development that needs to happen. So at the moment, no, it's not. But yeah, so looking at that there, where it says, I mean, nothing set in stone, but they've got area to expand next to where it says second rail berth. So just below that on the picture. Or, you know, further out towards the top part of that diagram. So that's what we can look at in terms of how we can actually incorporate that. And that would be part of that, what we're looking for, is to make sure that the proper infrastructure and funding, et cetera, that gets in there, that needs to be put in.
Okay, thanks for that. Estelle, you've got a question there? Thank you.
Yeah, kia ora tātou anō. I have quite a lot of understanding of the issue and have to declare that I have a conflict in that my husband owns the Ocean Beach Slipway and hauls out vessels there for repair and washdown. However, he's been a shipwright for 30 years and he's worked a lot on the Syncrolift prior to purchasing the Slipway 3 years ago. And while it is an issue that there's not enough room for, not enough availability for vessels to get out of the water and onto the hard for work to be done to them, a lot of the issue is that Real Journeys are taking up all the space at the Syncrolift with their vessels, and there's never enough room for the commercial operators to get up, as well as the cost factor. But having said that, a lot of them too don't want to pay to come out. So what they do is they get on a trailer and come out on the yacht club ramp and go to Bluff Engineering using a public access road, which I don't think is actually legal, on trailers that aren't registered, to bring their boats out to scrub them down without having to pay as much as they would if they come up on Pete's slip at Ocean Beach or on the Syncrolift. So there's a bit of a balance that needs to be addressed around their responsibilities to come out of the water and do what's necessary to bring their boats up to scratch for biosecurity, as well as supporting local businesses in the town. That's all my comment. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Estelle, and being honest up front there. Okay, Nickel, I think that'll be the last question, then we'll.
Well, no, thanks for that, Estelle, because that gives a wee bit of background. And the more I look at this picture, it's not so much the full out facility, it's actually space for them to actually be dealt with. So it may not be as big a problem as was initially envisaged. It was always the idea that if there was the payment you might get somebody who would operate the thing, not us ourselves. But in the funding, remember I had quite a positive conversation some months ago with the head of Kanoa, who indicated that may well be within the scope of what they would look at. So that's a new factor that we haven't had in the past. So I think we need to come up with what the right solution is. I think funding it may not be as big a burden as it's been in the past, but we need a business plan and a plan for.
Okay. Oh, well, that's really good. Thanks very much for that. For that report. And could I ask that someone can move to note that, Lyndall, in the seconder, please? And all those in favour? Against? It's carried. So Nick, you remain seated for the next item. I see, which is on the Waituna Charitable Trust report. Okay. So, right. You want to start us off?
So we've been involved with the Whakamatea Charitable Trust for just over 6 years now. It was all part of the big team of funding that we received through the Ministry of the Environment, freshwater improvement funds. So this has now ended. Back on the 10th of May, the official deed and projects finished. There's a couple of actual work streams that are still continuing on due to various hiccups, timing wise, that they couldn't complete. But other than that, most of the agreed programs of work have been undertaken and completed and achieved quite considerable, some good outcomes there. So what we're now looking at is, there's been a bit of a report put together around monitoring and evaluation that's currently sitting with the trust to be approved. So around looking at what we've done throughout, highlight some of the challenge and some of the insights as well for working in this collaborative space, as well as actually doing a quite good thing around highlighting our milestones and the achievements that have been achieved. Looking at the next steps, what we're trying to do now is what's next for the trust, but also what's next for us at Environment Southland. So internally, we're doing a bit of a work around establishing exactly what are our priorities, what's our vision for Waituna internally here at Environment Southland, and that will also inform, how we actually work with the trust going forward. And being committed to in a previous meeting that we're still supportive of the trust and what we're going to continue on with that. And that was highlighted a while back around the smaller trusts that we're actually moving into. So that's sort of where we're at here.
Thanks for that, Nick. I just might just head off the first question. Will that opportunity to discuss the future for the direction of the trust be amongst the council too? I'd assume the councillors here, will that come across our desk at some stage?
So I think what Nick's alluding to is how do we internally support the trust going forward with the work that we do? How to ensure that's aligned and meets a range of objectives and priorities. So that's an internal piece of work that we're happy to share with council when that's been completed. It's probably not. It's for the trust to determine how it prioritises its own work, but certainly we're very clear that we want to continue to support the trust. We do a lot of work in on and around Waituna, and we're trying to maximise that by showcasing that to say this is what we're doing. It hopefully aligns with the outcomes of the wider sort of organisational aspirations, and if there are things that we can do slightly differently, open to those things as well. So
Eric and then Nicole.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the same issue, and I just read work programs within council that already contributed. And given that what we're doing there is very dependent on the goodwill of the local community down there, and we actually don't know the shape that this is going to end in a decade or 2 decades time, we need to take them on the journey with us. And I would hope that there is some way of having a communication process about their expectations, what's happening, so that we can keep them on board. So that might be what's intended, but just the way I read this within the council, it doesn't actually comment on sort of a wider assessment of what the locals down there might think. And I see that as pretty important that we keep them on team.
Yeah, very, very good point. So through a lot of the discussions we've had so far internally, because that's one of the things that's been highlighted, is that the necessity is community is going to be on board with us with this journey. So that is going to be
Cool. Thank you.
to make sure that gets.
I think it's a good point. It's a natural direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I'm finished.
Yes. So Nicole and then John.
Yes, no, thanks for the report. And while the trust will have to make some decisions, I think partners themselves have to have a thought and think about what the business case is going forward, what's the appetite for funding, because that, from all of partners, because that will actually shape the future of the trust. And we've all sort of agreed that we want a community according to that trust in the future. Actually, that was one of the aspirations that we probably didn't land during the project. But going forward, we want the community to describe what's going on down there. There could well be the ability to the real partners in particular to collaborate with some of the groups like the Next Foundation, etc., to find ways of actually funding further things going forward. So it's the end of stage one, but it's not the end of the work in that area. And it's actually a reflex, I guess, for a slim down trust, slim down budget. Yes, yeah. But how do we go forward? And we need to be there long enough to be able to see some of these innovations that have been put in place. We'll see the science, see the results of the wetland That's going to take a year or two.
Okay, thanks very much. John.
Obviously, a question around the trust structure. We talk about the community and we're slimming down on the trustees. What representation do we have of the community on the trust, or is it all the other parties apart from one that are on the trust? It's just a question I have because I kind of find it hard to take the community if they feel that they've got a group that can make decisions. Just gonna make it nice and warm and fuzzy for us and we'll follow along.
I think, Paul, you can talk to this, but I could probably just say, I think that's been quite clearly identified that we do have some challenges in the next phase of what we want to do. Yeah, Paul.
So I think I'm correct to say that there's not a community representation on the trust itself. It's SDC, ourselves, iwi, Ngāi Tahu, and Living Waters, I think it's referred to, isn't it? Of which there is, and then underneath that there's the a group of staff really. I think project, a group of practitioners that work along the work programme, and so I would expect that as we formulate work stream 2, which is what we're entering into. As staff that represent those organisations work through the work programme, the community component and community conversations will be part of that work stream 2 that will come through that control group that goes up through to the trust to sort of advise or provide advice on how we do, the next stages and how that interacts with the community. And so not just a conversation for Environment Southland, a conversation for all those groups.
Jeremy.
Just a quick one in regards to obviously the farm plans developed. It helps. Just what level of farm plan was it specifically for the Waituna? And the issues, or is it just industry farm plans? Obviously, farm plans are.
Very quickly, because they've got another item that we're back to this. So very quickly, to date, farm plans have been done, focus activity farm plans and Fonterra farm plans for people in the Waituna catchment. It is going to have its own catchment context and obviously some attention through the farm plan, Southland farm planning model. And that at this stage is scheduled to come in July next year, but there's again a bit of talk about that exact date. So certainly it'll have its own catchment context, and whatever's in play now will be updated to have that information as part of the compliance.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Gianna.
Oh,
thanks very much.
Just one more question. I will second that, but what's the relationship with the trust to the resource consent to maintain the lagoon or open it from time to time? That's on hold, I understand at the moment, but does the trust have a role in that or not really?
Trust itself doesn't have a role, but the entities at the table do. So it looks like it will be that we will join iwi and DOC and a new consent. That's still working slowly through the system. So we'll have conversations because we're sitting there, but the trust per se is not part of that. Yeah.
So, but the goal of the trust will be to protect the lagoon from an environmental point of view as much as possible. I imagine in that process, is that right? Or do you don't become, you say you join those parties, will you make submissions or anything like that?
Well, yeah, they could be an interested party that everybody knows that the lagoon playing are only going to be open in the future for ecological reasons rather than for farming, and that's been known for some time. So it is grinding through the system. I'm looking forward to seeing a notification and see where that goes.
So we don't, to be clear, we don't have any process in place at the current time if there needs to be any action taken down there in regards to opening a regime.
No, so yeah, if I could try to provide some clarity. Yes, it's correct that the existing consent is no longer active, and there is a consent that, as I understand it, is on hold but processing in terms of a new application which is with DOC and iwi. we as an organisation, we keep an active watch on the lagoon in terms of levels and indications when we'll be doing that. There is no with the consent being expired and a new one going through the process, there isn't any consent conditions to rely on in order to open the consent. So should there be justification for that or concerns, then it would go through an additional process under the RMA. But we would have to keep that be across and work with our partners on should that be required.
Okay, well, that's good. I understand the water levels are reasonably high down there at the moment. So if there's no further questions, Nicole moved it and Morris seconded it. All those in favour of noting this report of Nick's? Against? It's carried. Thank you very much. So we'll go to the next item, item 3, biosecurity, biodiversity, operations division report. Kelly, how you doing? Long time no see.
Hi, everyone.
So look, would you like to take us through this report? It's pretty detailed and comprehensive. And one thing that really stuck out for me is just say it up front, is the amount of small groups and partnerships that the team is working with right across the region. It's pretty complex, isn't it? Yeah. So look, what's yours? Take it away.
So I'm sorry, I don't have any slides for you today, so you've just got me talking. I'm sorry. And we're going to do a full detailed report on the Jobs for Nature and particularly the EEF stuff at the next regional services, because I think that's one that everyone's really interested in. You probably want to be involved in detail. So this is just operational annual report of the division for the year. For the biosecurity perspective, that's a requirement of the Biosecurity Act. It's always a really good chance to reflect on what it is we're doing and where we're going and where we need to put more effort and really think through what our programs are doing. It always blows my mind every year when I'm pulling this together and all the work that the team does, that this goes getting to 50 pages. So it's a huge amount of work that the team are currently delivering, and they're doing an amazing job. So I guess the big reflections for the year is we're on year 4 of our pest management plan. That means we're getting a pretty good idea about whether we're going to meet our 10-year targets. In some areas, eradication, yeah, we're looking pretty good, although the more we look, the more we find. Exclusion, really good to see the number of people who are reporting things in. We're actually having to do a whole heap of exclusion work, which is really good, but it means that we're running around trying to deal with exclusions. And obviously the Didenium vaccine exclusion earlier in the year was a pretty big blow for our program overall, but we've dealt with that one. The one that probably really worries us the most is the progressive containment programs. So we've had a fantastic boost with Jobs for Nature. There's been a step change for those programs. We've been able to really get out there, particularly around the edge of Fiordland, both in the water and at the water with the plants, and then the Walling Conifer program. And we are just seeing the scale that those pests are now moving into, where they're going. It's despite all of our work, it's really hard to keep up with. So we need to have a really good think over the next 3 to 5 years about what the future of those programs looks like and what we can actually achieve, or what budget we need to do to really contain those species. And in a similar vein, the sustain control, the possums, where we're working really hard and we're keeping numbers reasonably low, but that program is getting tougher and tougher to keep farmers working with us. And also, as Osprey have pretty much left the region now, we just can't keep up with that. So we need to do a really good review. Which means we're doing a lot of thinking about RPMP 2029. So the next couple of years, we're going to be trying to gather as much information as we can, really think about climate modelling, really think about what's coming our way, so that we can start getting ready for the next RPMP as we keep working through this one. So quite a lot happening in that space. The Marine Pathways plan, it's ticking away, it's working reasonably well. We had the issue in Milford and like really high non-compliance in Milford. It's the first time we'd ever looked there, so I think it's a few people by the time. Hopefully when we go back this year, we'll get much better compliance. And in the biodiversity space, most of it's been covered by Jobs for Nature at the moment. And as I said, we'll go through that in detail at a separate session when we can really talk about it. But Polly, the team leader there, did a little bit of analysis recently, and she said that because we've now got the systems in place and because we've now got ourselves really sorted on what we're doing, each of the officers is doing 3 times the amount of plans and engagement work than when we just had one person when we were trying to do it on this small minority right. So each person's delivering 3 times more than we were able to previously, which I think is just a great sign, amazing what the team are achieving. So yeah, just wanted to acknowledge that and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. We've got any questions. Keep here.
I've always got questions.
That's good. We'll just keep it written down.
So I've got that 3 quite specific questions, and I note the comment about the Darwin's Barberry weevil, and I'm wondering about the efficacy of that. And a seed weevil only to some extent limits control. So what's our policy on Darwin's Barberry? Is this it? And also it was a bit of a sleeper until we saw it on Stewart Island. What's the status of it over there?
Okay, so the policy is that we are trying to protect Fiordland National Park and Rakiura National Parks. We've basically said that those are the 2 bits of the region where we're going to try and keep it out of. We will support landowners with trying to biocontrol and things where we can, but there's limited effectiveness so far. So we're trying to push it back from the national parks. The 2 Jobs for Nature programs, ours, Breeding Fiordlands Buffer, and then Surset, they got an awful lot of money as well done on Rakiura, has made really good progress pushing through on private land on both of those areas. But unfortunately, in both cases, we are finding that there are trees on the national parks. So we're doing a huge amount, but actually maintaining that and then helping DOC do their side of the boundary to really keep it in line is going to be an ongoing challenge.
And my second question is about Narsella Tussock in Otago. How close is it to the southern boundary? So, but the other thing is we have quite a large population of pig hunters and trampers and people, and I'm wondering if we doing enough to just highlight the risk that is available, because it's my understanding the only way you can control it once it's in is by grubbing, and that is a reasonably serious undertaking once it does escape. So my question is, how close to the southern boundary, and are we doing enough to alert people to the risks?
So I can double check this with my team, but I think the closest site is Coronet Peak. And then there's a bit around Roxburgh, and then it's
Roxburgh.
and Otago are working really hard on maintaining on killing it in those areas. The second bit of the question, I think it's relevant for all of our exclusion programs, is how do we make sure people are aware, and how do we make sure people are cleaning and not bringing in and we could definitely be doing more. It's something we'd like to be focusing on, really work out what the high risk pathways are. Is it a hunter and their boots, or is it farm machinery? What are the things that's likely to move it, and then how do we work with those people to make sure it happens?
Oh, well, the other question was just a wallaby report, given that they're also extending their range rather dramatically. What's our intel on that?
The latest one, Otago have been up in a helicopter and had a look, and it found no sign that there is a wallaby in that latest report area. So again, we're really supporting Otago and Canterbury. We really want them to do their jobs really well and protect us, and encourage people to tell us if they see anything.
Thank you,
Jeremy, and then Paul, and then Morris.
It always concerns me with the possible patrol areas. We've always sort of struggled with all the contractors, and it's pretty hard work. It's not an easy job. But my concern is obviously looking ahead, the amount of trees being planted and vegetation that has been planted, and looking not just in the next few years, but the 10 and stuff. And I just encourage them, you said you're going to be on a review, and we really need to see what this will cost, get some real numbers. See that's some area that's going to have to do something actually funding. Make sure that's something in the future that we don't get any more coins and things from the past. So make that comment.
Paul.
Thank you for the report. Regarding the possum control areas and the difficulty with some landowners, what do you mean by that? They're not helping or assisting?
So it's landowner responsibility. So it's up to landowners to keep it down. But what we're finding is a lot of areas, either because landowners aren't seeing possums, they got so many other things to worry about right now that they don't do the possum control, and then possum numbers stop building up again. But also people are doing more and more wild animal control and trying to take deer and things out, and then they don't want to use toxins. And so stuff is getting much harder. People are getting a little bit complacent, and there's people have got so many more priorities that possums have we haven't seen TB for a while, so possums have dropped off a lot.
We don't want to see TB.
We definitely don't want to see TB.
And once again, regarding the Darwin Barber, and you were saying that we're trying to stop it at the gate for Fiordland National Park. And we're doing a pretty good job on that. And then we find maybe comments slip through there that we found it within the park. So is it going to be reversal soon where, because of their inaction, we're going to be having to fight it coming back out of the park?
Hopefully not.
We're responsible areas.
Hopefully not. Well, one of the positive things I should say that because we had that program in Fiordland, a lot of locals now talking about setting up community projects and working with DOC to try and deal with it on their side of the boundary. So hopefully DOC can get on top of it, and it's.
And so,
No,
just one other thing regarding DOC University, which is close to the park and surrounded by farming or residential property. We noticed that they are least managed land and some of the worst for havens for weeds and problem areas. Is there any way we can try and initiate more effort by DOC? Because that's within our region.
Yeah.
It's administered by.
So where we have a good neighbour rule in place, we're able to bind Crown, so we can work with them on compliance of some species. I think Gorse and Bream and a couple of others, we can actually, if we choose to go down the compliance path, and whereas we're working with them, it's a better way of doing it, but we can for some species, but not for everything.
But they are perfect habitats for species like Darwin's barberry, wilding conifers, and everything else. If they're not managed properly, they can be a little pimple in the middle of area. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. We've got a question from Morris and then from Estelle, then Gail.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said just got 4, Ali. On page 19, you talk about rip gut brome, which I hadn't heard about before. It sounds pretty terrible, but so it's not here, so they're not doing anything about it.
Yeah, as far as I am aware, it's reasonably widespread. It's not something that we.
Is the name justified?
I could not tell you, I'm afraid. I'd have to ask Charlie on that.
The second question relates to clean vessel pass on page 20. You say a number of vessels did not have a clean vessel pass. So what happened to those people? And is that something that's increasing or decreasing?
So we found an increase this year, but there was pretty much all in Milford. Yeah. So what we do is we'll do the inspection on the boat. If you've got a clean vessel pass, then that inspection is free. If you don't have a clean vessel pass, we will charge you for the inspection. So everybody that we found without a clean vessel pass got a warning letter to make sure you get one next time, and then they've been charged for the inspection. And if we then find anything on the boat, they get charged for cleanup costs as well.
So it's those trailer boats, or are they?
It was a mixture, but unfortunately it did include commercial vessels that should have known better and should know the rules.
So you think what you're doing is effective?
We're getting really good compliance in place, like down in Doubtful, and we have picked up past issues by doing the surveillance before they've become an issue. So we had the prosecution earlier in the year with area on a vessel, we have previously picked up Sabella. So what we're doing is great. We'd like to be doing more and more and more and doing more surveillance. And hopefully when we get back into this year, we'll see an increase because they're expecting this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just a couple more, Mr. Chairman. The predator-free project that seems to now come to agreement with New Zealand on future funding. So what's the future of that?
So that's Predator-Free Southland 1. So we still have funding from ES, Invercargill City, Gore, I think, a little bit of me left from Ngāi Tahu. So we're using that to work out what funds, what can we afford, what can we do as a region, what is going to be worthwhile for community groups, and what can we provide. And then we'll be working on Predator-Free Racking as well, and what can we do to support that. So we're having to do a little bit of a reset as to what we can and can't do for that funding. It's still land ticking away.
So we're not too worried about that, or is that going to be a major problem in terms of achieving predator-free?
We are going to need significant funding to achieve Predator-Free 2050. We can't currently do it with what we've got. We can achieve little bits and we can support our community to do what the bits that they value, but to do that big large landscape, that we're going to need the type of funding that we were looking at previously.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
have you got something else, Morris?
one last one, yeah. You did mention this before about new pests coming in, and obviously climate change is a factor, is an issue. And I've just asked myself, is it realistic? Will it be realistic to keep some pests out, or are we going to have to accept some because we won't have the resources to keep them out? And how are we going to manage that situation? You said you were thinking about it before, so it's on the radar. This is perhaps a little bit more clarification about that.
I think we're going to have to start doing some really thorough risk assessments on if things are moving down the country, which are the ones that are really going to cause us a problem and which are the ones we can actually do anything about. Looking at some of the issues that other regions deal with, then no, we can't deal with everything. Particularly plant issues further up the country are absolutely huge, and we've been really lucky that our climate protects us. That's going to change. We're not going to be able to do everything. We're going to have to do risk assessments and have some really hard choices about what we accept and what we let go and what we buy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks very much. So we've got Phil, you've got a question here, and then Gail, then we might finish with Nick.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Hi, Ali. You've actually answered the question I had, Morris asked. But I do have a comment, and seeing you've put me in mind of an email I got today from the Environment Select Committee report that's just been released on cats. And they're looking to implement legislation nationwide for cat management. So yeah, so just an FYI, that framework is based on cats being desexed, microchipped, and registered similarly to how dogs are. So much more effective than a bylaw. And so I just thought you might be interested in knowing that. And yeah, and there was only one party, it was bipartisan support, except for one party that opposed it. So so that's just an FYI. Good report, thanks very much.
Thanks, Estelle. Gail.
Morris actually asked my question, which was about funding beyond Jobs for Nature. However, I do believe that we need to be, or communities need to be lobbying for some type of ongoing funding, because a lot of good stuff's been done with Jobs for Nature. And I'll just remind everyone about history keeps repeating itself, and I've said it before about the Undaria program that was around in the late 90s, early 2000, and if that had been ongoing and maintained, that program, we wouldn't need to have this Fiordland Pathways Management Plan relating to Undaria today. So we can't afford in the future to take our foot off the pedal. We need to keep going. And that's all I was going to talk about. Oh, yes, and also other areas like the Rakiura. It's no use just protecting ring fencing one area like Fiordland. Bluff Harbour is absolutely, it's everywhere. Stewart Island, it's everywhere. So every exit point that our vessels can leave are going to end up with it if they haven't already got it. So you've got to look wider than one place. Kia ora.
Thanks for that, Carl. I'd assume that would be the airport too. You know, with all those points of entry and exit. The Rekiura home. Nickel, please, you've got a question.
On page 54 and 55, there's ongoing frustration with wild and conifer furs not being controlled. And just the way it reads is possibly, can we identify where they're coming from? Because, you know, could we use an abatement notice? Can we actually do something to make sure that people actually stick to the polluter pays thing at the moment? I know the NES is weak. It is being reviewed, but you know, we've just spent a lot of money, but we've still got the Douglas fir spreading out of other places. So we know it's something that can go for a long way.
So yeah, myself and Jolie and the Path Fund team have just been through a big analysis of all of the known places where we think wild and conifers are spreading. We have found several sites where the RPMP rules could be used to require trees to be removed, and where it's obvious that they are coming from neighbouring forestry because there's nowhere else it could come from. There's a lot of sites where it's a little bit more ambiguous and distances involved. We can't prove it. So you may see us starting to do a little bit of compliance this year, but our first point is making sure that that compliance is actually going to achieve something, and that we're actually, if we're going to enforce it, that it needs to be worthwhile and that it's appropriate enforcement. But there are some cases in the region where you might start seeing some enforcement coming through in the next 12 months.
Rightio, thanks very much for that. I think it's quite important seeing that photo on page 54 of the wildings escaping, and we had a discussion this morning about employing technology more in the future, especially someone mentioned AI, about you could think this could be a good application to spot these areas, to fly over with a helicopter instead of using people to go out and search for stuff. You know, so hopefully with luck, not that I know anything about technology, of course. Thanks very much, Nicole, to move, and Paul to second, and all those in favour. Thank you. Against. It's carried. Thanks very much, Ali. So we'll move on to the next report. Is Fiona, please, for the Catchment Integration Division Annual Report.
Just going to pop up. So through you, Mr. Chairman, I've got a handful of slides, no long ones, Brittany. Handful of slides just to take through, just I guess going through some of the projects we've been involved with from a catchment integration perspective this year, and obviously take the report as read, but just to highlight some of the things we're pretty excited about for the year that has been. Okay. Right, so again, I guess we'd like to anchor what we do with the divisions in terms of those themes of connect, learn and act. So we want to make sure that we're really focused on connecting with our people, that we're helping them learn new information. And I have to say for this year, one of the big focuses has been around some of the regulatory frameworks that are coming into play. We found ourselves reasonably active in that space, but also acting in terms of actually delivering action on the ground, which has been kind of a thing we've had for many years. We want to make sure that we're actually empowering our community to act. So again, that facilitate the connection, providing that advice and education, supporting our regulatory responsibilities for a range of areas, and looking for opportunities wherever we can to be improving environmental practices, and, as I say, to help understand the new regulations. As I said before, we really love to celebrate success. This is us at the close of the ACE Saparima project, probably a month or two ago, and actually importantly looking at the health of the estuary. So one of the big themes has been Mountains to Sea, Kuiu te Ki Tai, and actually ensuring that our community understand the values of those estuaries and the challenges that those estuaries are under in terms of land use practices and historical practices. On the right-hand side there, just picking up on a couple of those, I've talked about empowering landowners has been really significant. So, it's all very well to pass on information, but we want people to do things differently, to learn and implement new practices. And the other thing that we're very conscious of as part of moving to the space of hauora and operating in a framework of Te Mana Te Wai is incorporating Te Māori perspectives. So again, looking for those opportunities.
Sorry to interrupt you, just a question. Can you share the screen?
Oh,
Fiona, can that be done? Cool. Gail's just asked a question.
Sorry.
No worries.
Apologies, Galen. So coming into a bit of a project focus now, hopefully you're very soon going to be able to see our Home Creek project. So as part of the WIO project, the WIO team have been working with landowners in the Home Creek, at Home Creek up not far from Manapori. Some of you, I think, were on site when we had an amazing sort of planting day there to get that project started. Interestingly, that comes off the back of work, importantly from catchment operations, in terms of the clearance that was needed of pest weeds from that area to be able to then get started on a planting program. And look, it's a long-term project, but I think a really exciting project. And the next step there is some work that we're going to do with Fiordland College. So we're looking to education opportunities, working with Department of Conservation, working with the landowners. So that's a piece of work that will continue on for some years, we expect, in terms of getting the planting done. Acknowledge actually the trailer load of plants that were donated by the nursery locally. And so really, pleased to have that whole sense of whole community involvement in this project. In terms of those themes of connect and act, obviously we've got a short presentation coming a bit later on around the 10th of winter grazing, but we have obviously had involvement in the aerial and roadside inspections, working with Dairy NZ, Federated Farmers, and also I think Beef and Lamb. We've had to really, take a next level step up in terms of our connections internally with communications, compliance and consents, and particularly because of the NES coming into play this year. And again, we do continue, and we mustn't lose sight of the core land management and land sustainability activities and the technical knowledge that our people possess in terms of actually ensuring that people in the community understand even the basics of what is a critical source area and the ways in which, we should apply best practice on these properties. Our Southland Riparian program continues. So our Charlton Waimumu, which was essentially the pilot's come to a close, and we've done a really neat little review. So thanks to some of the team for doing a review of that project, and we've planted in that area about 30,000 natives. That's through our work with Hopunui Runanga. We're now into the Southland Riparian program and working with Te Tapuatane Nursery. And so to date we planted, well, not me personally, but the program delivered 10,000 plants out into our community over the previous 12 months. And then into this financial year, we're on track again for spring planting and strongly encouraging farmers to take up that opportunity. As you know, part of our team is our education delivery into our schools and kindergartens, and again, a number of significant events. Obviously, we ran 3 big hui at the end of last year with a real catchment focus and looking at all elements and aspects of the catchment. We continue to bring, where we can, as much as possible, Te Māori, tikanga and concepts into school practices, and that's an area that I think is a work on for us. And then as part of the education space, we're working with schools in the Waipapai, and for councillors that haven't been, I definitely recommend you go and have a look at our planting site, take advantage of the new information board, and maybe even have a seat on the new seat that has been there, but also enjoy and look at some of the work that's done. And again, that's a really important link there back to the opportunities that are afforded to us from working with catchment operations in the flood management space. Gracious, yes, catchment groups. So we have over 35 catchment groups, I think, across the region, and we have had a number of, we attend a number of field days. Sometimes we're attending just to be there and support as part of the day, but other times we are in a delivery of information, whether it be around science knowledge, helping kind of with the citizen science type work, whether we're helping with good management advice and or regulations around grazing. So a range of topics there. Sediment traps is another one. So again, quite a lot of work going on to encourage sediment traps / constructed wetlands on properties at a scale that is manageable within sort of this one farming system. As I mentioned before, ACE concluded, so that's been 5 years. It's been working, the ACE has been working as part of the Thriving Southland model. You know, the aim was to try a number of things actually. There was a piece of work around helping farmers understand the health and values of their local waterways, and everyone has been through, well, everyone who attended has been through the Rapid Habitat Assessment, through the SHMAC kit, onto eDNA, and also looking at receiving environments, and we've been quite instrumental in that work across the organisation, not just the team. There's a work stream around sediment traps, so there's a number of sediment traps now across that catchment, and we've also given some support to the Future Farming Systems project. So, and they're looking to continue, and we will be alongside them in whatever way we can to help support that. We think there's a real opportunity here actually with some of the delivery work we have to do with farm plans, and we're also quite interested in the whole focus on how we might sort of think about catchment planning as part of the work we're doing with our Parima group. Forestry. So obviously we have legal obligations as an organisation under the NES Plantation Forestry. We give quite a degree of support to the compliance team in terms of looking through the afforestation notices, and that's obviously a regulatory component, but we also go out proactively on site visits, either because we think there's issues that we want to talk through, or because we're just doing good relationship building with forestry companies. And so we have a pretty close link with most of the larger forestry companies, including the ones that are working kind of on individual farms rather than sort of having whole plantation forestry. So that's an ongoing piece of work there, and a key piece of work in terms of delivering those good outcomes for the environment. Pollution prevention, that's in some respects there's been some elements of pollution prevention that have been just a bit quieter for the last few years, and we think both from an urban and a rural perspective this is a really important topic that we need to give some time and investment to. So you'll be familiar with some of our closed landfill work, but in the pollution prevention space it's actually how we're working with individual landowners around burning and plastic recycling, how we're working with people in the urban areas around particularly industrial site management and so forth. So there's more to come in that space. We're just in the early planning of that piece of work. And nearly at the end, that's just a great picture. Looking ahead, so just again to the future, that is just a bit of a heads up as to what's on the horizon. In my sort of view, coming back to the start, you know, we will continue those themes of connect, learn and act, whilst we have some key regulatory factors that are now really critical in terms of how we catchment integration deliver our work. We've never got to lose sight of some of that community connection work that we do, and also the delivery of that technical knowledge and information that is so fundamental as part of being sustainability. So, and I'll leave it there, and I welcome questions. Wow. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Fiona. That's pretty full on. It's like the last item. There's a heck of a lot going on, isn't there?
Yes.
I'll just make a comment before we go into questions. 56 schools in the Enviro Schools program. That's pretty impressive. How long has that been going for, that program?
I believe it's probably, in fact, it possibly is about 10 years. Yeah, that it's been underway in this region, and we're strongly committed to, you know, the Enviro Schools kaupapa and working even more closely through this human with our the TAs, with City Council and District Council. We're really trying to kind of engage in that, and also with iwi as well.
I think it's a very successful program. We'll leap into some questions. Paul, you got the first question.
Not really questions, it's just assisting with the home planting. I missed out on every photo opportunity. Didn't have to see my face in any of them. I was obviously gone by the time you hit the last one, but I was quite, the one learning I got from that was not only the efforts of everyone, but also the surprising difference in ground there that I'd never seen or noticed. The high sand content of roads easily erodible land. So it was really good to see that. You know, you don't turn off the main drag sometimes, and when you do, it's quite cool. So congratulations on that. It was a really good
Thank you. Jeremy and then Morris.
I've just got a question in regards, I was just reading about the critical role in building trust between the council and the community. Through good communication, shared understanding and understanding programs, processes and information, meeting the community's needs. I'm just trying to, it's an interesting scenario where we're going. We're trying to get good management practices and we're trying to do the good stuff. But then when compliance, there's a point when something might go wrong and compliance comes in and on board. And actually the understanding, does compliance, obviously you're all talking together internally of how that all blends together, because there is a bit of a blend there. But obviously I'm just trying to tease it out a wee bit from the point of understanding where compliance, how they interact as well. And there's probably obviously a wee bit of misunderstanding when they have to come in and use not a stack, but try and engage with the people on the ground. So I'm just trying to make sure there's obviously a policy, like you're all talking and understanding, but it's actually good to get it out in the community to say this is how a process will work too. So that it is very clear and I don't think from a compliance, because we're dealing with that with the grazing and there's been few issues. But there's the community that's actually dealing with these regulations doesn't actually really understand the compliance. They're trying to do the good stuff. And it's the old just to make sure that we're all on the same page, that it's not two different tracks we're going down. I was wondering, there's more of a statement, but I might ask you a couple more questions around the regulatory if we have compliance here, but it's.
Can I just add to that, Jeremy? I think it's a good point you're touching on, because we're sort of seeing things, we're entering into a more adversarial environment around this sort of stuff too, and we need to recognise that it's not as easy as it used to be. And maybe if we've got different challenges in front of us, we need to have different approaches to those. So yeah, just to add to that, Jeremy, but
There's just more regulation coming, so it's very clear that there are rules and it's at some point compliance comes in, you know, it's quite a bit.
You want me to comment?
yeah,
I think they're really good questions. I think so we take an integrated view, but there'll always be clear circumstances where we're in an advice support space, or we're in a compliance space, I suppose. And so we can't, you know, we have to recognise that that's usually, you know, my best response to that is, and that's a case by case basis. But certainly, if we take what we've been trying to do in integrated catchment management is to take a programme view and really try to be clear, like say, for example, when intensive winter grazing is like, when we're not in the wet season, our programme view is very much around advice, support and information. And we try to signpost that actually when we move into an obvious change in, say, weather, and that's when the practices are that we transition out of advice and support, and we're ultimately in a compliance conversation. So making that clear to the community. If it's not, we need to do a better job at that. But certainly, it's linked to how we develop our programs around support. Because and even if we're in a compliance conversation, it doesn't necessarily follow that we'll be taking action, because compliance officers also can provide advice and support as well. It's just a case by case basis.
I think that's important. They understand compliance situations. So good stuff. Well, I wouldn't say good stuff, but it's actually people do know, well, this is the process with the compliance coming. We're all going up to that point, and all of a sudden the police turn up, so to speak, and then it changes the tone of it. So I'm just trying to get a forward flow.
Fiona, you'd like to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just very briefly, I think this is a broader kind of engagement and communication conversation actually, but a couple of comments is I would have to say under the new kind of integrated model, we are working even more closely than we ever have done with consents compliance and catchment integration, and our teams sort of, if you like, on the ground in the office here, are across the building frequently checking in what's happening, how can we help, where's this person at, etc. And in terms of the language and how we're talking about things, really important. It's not uncommon for us to go out together, no matter what time of year actually. So if we need to, we can site visit, whether it be our team, catchment integration and consents and or compliance. We utilise that ability to do that whenever we can. What I would suggest is, or kind of point to, is that because of the nature of, particularly, to be honest, the winter grazing regulations, we are seeing people who perhaps haven't had interactions with consents compliance, with the language, with the kind of way things are done, very much in the past. And so we've been doing quite a lot of work, and we will continue to do this around helping people, helping kind of demystify that a little bit. And it is not necessarily anything about the language that we are using, it's just that it's new language, and understanding, you know, what those expectations are, I think is really important. So, you know, we'll continue to work in that space. And of course, the other thing, probably just to close, is that, you know, there is a spectrum, right? So at the top end of the spectrum is, you know, enforcement, and then down the other end of the spectrum is education and advice. So it's all just around actually how we're working with our community to meet those environmental outcomes. Yeah.
Good question, Jerry. So we've got Morris and then Lyndall.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think this is really good news. A very good report. Thanks, Fiona. I know that you work really well with the community, and all the work that's going on here, the riparian tree planting and everything is really good stuff. So it's very good to see the work that we do with Thriving Southland and all the catchment groups is really good stuff. And talking to some of the other regional councillors recently over the last week on the tour, you know, I think that what we do here is at least as good, if not better than anybody else. I didn't talk to everybody, but I talked to a fair few people from in the North Island and South Island, and you know, so I think what we're doing here is something to be really proud of. I think it's really good. We drove down the Opuhi catchment, through the Opuhi catchment from the Opuha Dam down to Timaru. And there's quite a lot of winter grazing occurring there. And I'm sure the others who were on the trip, Phil and Nicole, would note that on quite a few of those, of that land, there were slopes that looked to me to be pretty much well over 10 degrees. And in the gullies where there were no management of the swales, very much I could see, you know, large amounts of sediment lying there and obviously being transported off the slopes down into the gullies and out into the stream. Sure, they'd had a lot of rain a couple of days beforehand, but that's the time when you see all these things happening. So just congratulations to the team here. I think it's really good. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with that, with the width of the work that goes on here. So, Lyndall.
Thanks, Stephen. I've got three topics, if I might, please.
Yes.
Firstly, in the project overview pages, number 4 on page 79, it's about proposed landfill. So there's a little difference between the expected measures for 2022-23 for the in Capital City in particular. That's what I'm interested in, of course, and the actual progress that's been made there. So can you just illuminate me as to what caused the discrepancy, shall we say?
Yeah, and look, through you, Mr. Chairman, I think the challenge with those landfills is there is there's complexity in the process of actually identifying the landfill and characterising it, and then the process of developing kind of options and remediation options being going through there. So it's fair to say those conversations have taken slightly longer than we probably would have imagined when we scoped out the expected measures. But I have to say, in the last few months, there has been good progress a step ahead in terms of commitment to that first step, particularly around Murray Estuary. So I'm positive about that, but I'm also mindful it does take time and probably longer than perhaps we thought when we first scoped that out. Yeah.
Thank you. Secondly, interested in adding to your workload, and your thoughts on how a youth forum or a youth fora might be integrated into what we do, given the great education program that we have. Thoughts on how.
So the first thing I'd say is our education, so Josh, and who's our regional coordinator, is absolutely the expert in this space. There's two things I'd say. I mean, that is something that we would be happy if directed to go back and have a bit of a look at. What we have probably done is actually tend to think that the youth forums have sat within the district and city councils, and so there was a question as to whether we would want to replicate that or create another structure. But also to date, and partly this has come over the last few years because we've had sort of transitional sort of staff changes, but part of what we've focused on is projects. So if you look back over time, the microplastics work project, which was quite a big program of work across a number of key stakeholders and a number of schools. The Waiho Pi is another good example of working across a number of schools and a number of agencies. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing I am familiar with is that there's some quite good conversations going on internally around actually in the climate change space around how we might engage and activate youth more. So that may well yield sort of that a recommendation is, to pursue a youth forum. But that was kind of my understanding of our current situation. But again, happy to kind of have another look at that and come back to it.
And one more really specific question around the education program. Do we have a presence at the Careers Expos? Because, and I ask this because education is not just about the excellent work that we're already doing about the environment, but also upskilling our community so that we've got staff and counsellors. And so I just wonder if there's an opportunity at the secondary schools Careers Expos to have some of our fantastically skilled and amazing staff, everybody from comms to science to whatever, promoting the career opportunities and B, the organisation in parallel universe. But that's also quite a commitment, I understand. So
just briefly through you, Mr. Chair, I'm very conscious we didn't have a presence as far as I know. I'm not sure about other teams, but certainly I did not know of anyone that was there. So that is something that I think is well worth looking at. I think it would be a good thing from a leadership, from someone from the organisational perspective to be present.
That's a really good point, I think, Lyndall. Hey, we've got a question from Estelle, and then we've got Jeremy too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Fiona, for a good report. I've got a question around the education program, or a comment as well as a question. I've worked with the Enviro Schools project over the years in different capacities, and have been frustrated. The only reason I've been frustrated is because of the decile system within New Zealand that I found out recently as being white, limits the ability for low decile socioeconomic deprived schools to participate in Enviro Schools projects or to be part of that. And if we're thinking about education and supporting our communities around environmental management and building capacity, so we have staff and counsellors and mana whenua representatives, succession planning, how is ES, or how is your team looking to improve that connection with those lower decile schools, or those less fortunate that need to be a part of this?
So actually, look, to be honest, Estelle, through you, Mr. Chairman, that is an excellent question, and one that I probably don't want to sort of give a light answer to. I'd like to actually take that one away and actually put that lens across our program, because I think that's an excellent question as to whether, because I would, to be honest, I would hate to think that our program potentially has benefits for people who are more well equipped to be part of those things rather than others who perhaps don't quite have the same advantages. So look, to be honest, I think that's a really, really relevant question. It's not something I think that we have front of mind, and if I think particularly actually about our kindergarten support, so you'll be aware we've got a partnership with Kindergarten South, and I don't think there's any distinguishing at all. We have kindergartens from across the Invercargill area involved in that program. I guess what I would say, and this is interesting, I've been an observation from the past, is we find some of our rural schools, our Te Anau schools, our Gore schools, a lot more actively engaged in some of these programs. Perhaps some of our town schools as a whole, as opposed to a kind of a based on decile, but less engaged in some of these programs. So I think that would be a worthwhile kind of, you know, review that we would do to actually determine our, you know, whether that was something that actually was unfolding in terms of availability and access. And certainly in the past, you know, for example, we've had cost, just the language is about to leave me. We have funding opportunities for people to attend our regional hui. So we've tried to make it, and that's available to everyone, right? So, and we also try and run those hui in places now. We used to have one hui, we now have probably 2 hui at the end of the year. And what we do there is place them so that people can come to, you know, it's less of a journey for people depending on where they are in the region. But no, I'm happy to take that back to the team and we can have a look at that.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, Estelle. Morris, question. No, sorry, Jeremy.
Just a quick question on, obviously leading on our lease land. It's all put on hold, but obviously with the discussion around wetlands and things, it probably doesn't look good that we're just put it on hold. But it says led by another division. I just wonder who the division is and just how long are we putting it on hold?
I'll just through you, Mr. Chairman. So on hold is possibly not the best description. I think there's sort of a broader look at actually how that project should sit across the organisation, how we can best deliver that. I don't know if you wanted to add.
Yeah, so it's most definitely not on hold, and most definitely a priority project of which there's a internal group been set up just to sort of pull together the various things, ideas, components, and I'm very clear that at the first opportunity we'll be bringing back an update to the Regional Services Committee on it.
And certainly through you, Mr. Chairman, that hasn't stopped us continuing to work on some of the initiatives that are going on our lease land, whether it be wetland developments or ensuring that we've got a close eye around winter grazing practices, and all of that is still ongoing actively. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Please you answer that one. Save me asking. Yeah, so yeah, that one. Can I just ask a final question? The Otapuni catchment plan, and what's the naturalisation of the Otapuni?
So again, that is
On hold.
that's some work that we have been looking at, and we're just trying to, we are in the process of whether it goes into the Otapuni or whether we look at the Waihopai. So again, happy to report back to the committee on that one. We have funding, and this is around the broader concept of catchment planning. So it's actually bringing into play existing land uses, opportunities for restoration, requirements from a flood management perspective, and particularly in those urban catchments, and also actually looking at some of our catchments that are in our urban areas to try and highlight some of the challenges that we have. So that may morph into a slightly different conversation in the time ahead. We're busy working on that at the moment.
It might work in when you're talking about the engagement of urban schools, for example, just before.
Yeah.
And you know, like I think most people have gone up to the Kmart there and you go on that escalator and you look outside and it's not terribly inspiring what you see.
Surely you take the stairs, Chairman.
No. So it could be a really good project because it is a major drain. You could say it's treated as such, isn't it? But there's some real scope there to get some interaction.
And through you, Mr. Chairman, it doesn't take too much digging actually to find, you know, historical values from mana whenua, the importance of that to the community of Southland on one side of the story, and then on the other side of the story is extensive, you know, change over time in terms of works within the waterway, extensive development of industrial areas. So it's and then the opportunity, because we have, you know, leased land in that area. So it's a great story as to how you would bring together a catchment management approach that is overlaid by some of the minimum requirements around flood management and at a broader level. So it's for the future. I didn't want to open up that massive conversation right this minute, but that's quite exciting.
Oh, well, that's really good. Look, at this point, thanks very much, Fiona, for that, and appreciate that. And can I find Lyndall to move into the second that, please, that report, Morris, and all those in favour? Against? Carried. Okay. So we'll move on to the next report, catchment Operations.
I think Dave and Paul have become to say Randall's not sick today, so best. So gentlemen, would you like me to just do a high level? And you're here to, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
I was going to say there's no formal presentation from us.
No. Yeah. So just high level, obviously take the report as read, and Dave and Paul here are able to answer some of the more technical questions if you've got them. Annual inspections for this period, 23-24 underway. And they're expected to be completed by mid-August, which is quite an achievement, if that's possible. You'll notice if you've been travelling to Gore anytime soon that all the high-risk trees have been removed, and stump removal and bank remediation will be undertaken in the next construction season. We effectively pull the roots out and reform the banks. That's quite a big piece of work. You'll see quite an impactful picture on page 96 of the Mataro Gravel Island. So my thanks to Hokanui and Runaka to work directly with them for the removal of that gravel. That's quite I went out there about 2 months ago and I was astonished by the size of the gravel island. So this is, and as you know, this is going, the materials being used in the construction of the Gore stop bank, and I think that's on Ontario Street. I hope I said that correctly. You'll also probably be well aware that we've completed the Waimumu stop banks, and our Wyndham and Waihopai stop banks will be recommencing once the weather permits. Do you have an idea of what that's likely to be, gentlemen? November. We do talk a little bit about the erosion in the Waio, the Blue Cliffs issue, and the work that we've done to undertake a detailed site investigation of the historic landfill. And we're sure we've been quite supportive of that work with SDC, and we are working through what that means in terms of the historic landfill. Notwithstanding the community are somewhat concerned around the erosion of their own properties, but that is work that's being worked through with SDC at this moment. And then I'll move on to the Mataro True Right Bank. So work has started. The access road has been built. I'm not sure if it's been completed.
So down towards the south end, I guess you could say the true right towards the freezing roots, so to speak, that end. That's where the erosion's at its worst. There's, as you can see in the report, through you, Mr. Chair, there's the erosion's continuing, and we're concerned about that area first. So there's a bit of a ramp actually that we're finishing off the ramp so we can get at that piece first. And we're looking at doing 200 metres out of the 700 metres of that. We're also working with Hokanui Runanga, who have done some electrofishing in that area for Kunakuna. They haven't found any yet, but they're going to carry on up that stretch.
So really keen to get the rock in the place that it needs to be, but that's and then we talk about the hydraulic modelling, but I'll just signpost that for you if there are any questions. And then I don't know if this maybe would have been aware of this a few months ago, but working with the ICC to identify, similar to what we did with Gore, high-risk trees around our stop back infrastructure, and how we actually need to just get on and deal with some of those. Notwithstanding, trees are very important to communities, and we will work with ICC and the communities to make sure that our messages and our intentions are really clear before we remove trees. But the point is still the same, that trees growing on or near our stop banks are a risk that we need to manage, and so that's work that I think Jimmy's undertaking with ICC.
The tree thing is quite interesting, isn't it? It points towards people talking about trees and the amenity value of them, and that's all very well, but it points to me when I talk to people that they've got a high degree of comfortability with their flood protection, that they're talking trees in such a way as opposed to the flood protection. So that's it's a pat on the back for some, you could say.
Yeah, but I'll leave it at that. And are there any questions?
John?
So Tirawa floodgates. I'm just thinking the whole big picture here. I presume it's all leased land behind it, or is it private land that comes up to it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's private land that comes into that as well. So,
Yeah, mixture, but predominantly leased land, but there is private land, I think. I'm correct. in saying.
Obviously, you have to be fish passage and all that stuff for the
Yeah.
would there have to be reconstruction there of the gate? I presume it's the gate that we looked at on our tour.
yeah, so the gates in some form have been in there since World War One.
Yeah. I guess what I'm asking is, we're not going to spend any money over designing if we're looking at doing
Well,
something else.
I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe it's an upgrade to infrastructure. It's actually the permit to have and so it's the permitting of that piece of infrastructure. I don't believe there's any improvements, notwithstanding that there may be some fish passage issues.
Okay.
Yeah, there might be fish passage. Yeah, I'm not sure. Dave, you may be able to
Yeah, the
clarify.
concern from the stakeholder groups is around fish passage and Inanga spawning. We've engaged PDP, who've done a couple of reports that offered some mitigation. There's obviously some differences of opinion around that, so we're looking to notify that.
I think Jeremy and then Nicholas.
Yeah, just taking a few while to get that. Progress in something for a while. Just in regards, obviously the tree, just picked up on the tree. I keep on going past Gore flood banks, and I think what an amazing tidy job. And it looks quite nice and tidy. It wasn't all the trees taken out. It's actually really well sorted, and it gives different views of the river and things. So really good. I forgot what I was going to first say now. Yeah, Matera Gorge. That's what I was saying. Where's the Matera Gorge? That's referring to the section through Matera there, through the under the bridge and all through those areas. You're looking at the light. You're talking about the lighthouse. Yeah, the two. I just see Matera Gorge or something. It sounds like it's a gorge somewhere, but is it the falls? Below the falls. Below the falls there. Yeah, so. Through, but it's quite deep through there, so the bathymetric lidar hasn't been able to penetrate to give us, and that's just an example of some of the data set that is incomplete. So yeah, we're working with that provider to try and fix those gaps. I guess you could say. It's just in regards to the island through the Matera Gorge. Is the gravel, are we extracting all the gravel off there no matter what, or will it get used all up in the core area, or it's unsure. Stop piling about whether all of it will be used. At this stage, certainly will provide bulk fill for some of the core work.
Certainly, if that's the question, we can bring that back.
It just makes sense while you're there, you get rid of it.
Nicholas and then Morris.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The picture on page 98 of no grass cover on the bank just reminded me of the conversation I've had in recent weeks with some Tuatapere residents. We've got the conservation or DOC administering the reserve behind it, and there's no vegetation on a lot of that bank. I think probably staff have had conversations in the past and not made much headway with some of the class actions going on at the moment from insurance companies. Maybe we need to elevate that conversation. We don't want to take out whole trees, but it's probably just branches. I'm not sure if you're probably more aware of what the issue is, but if the integrity of the stock bank is under threat, and it's in the too hard basket, it's a conversation probably needs to be held. Like to comment on that, you?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I think the question of ownership of the Tuatapere flood banks is yet to be resolved, isn't it, Paul? So we've still got to have a meeting with STC to sort that out. But yeah, we agree that that bush is too close to that flood bank. It is shading. It is a problem. It needs to be addressed.
Okay, it is a good question though, when it comes to liability and insurance.
So, sorry, I can say that there's the Tuatapere Stockbank conversation there has been conversations, and they're ongoing, and we will bring back an update soon. Yeah.
Thanks, Nicole. Morris.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just about the Titara tide gates, see that an application for reconsenting theirs is on a hold for further information. I wonder if there's an opportunity here to, obviously you'll be looking at fish passage issues in relation to those tide gates and the renewal of them. Because you need to provide for fish passage, and at the moment it's not very satisfactory from what I understand from our meeting on site there a little while ago. And also I wonder if there's an opportunity to provide a bit of re-wetting, can we call it, of the wetlands and land above the tide gates. The tide gates are set at a certain level, obviously that would impact the leaseholders, but it might be a really good opportunity there to enhance native fish habitat, in particular whitebait and other coastal species.
Chair, so part of our mitigation plan that we were on PDP, hopefully will address some of the concerns from the stakeholders, but time will tell, I guess. You know, in terms of the effect or the benefit from that scheme, if you can consider a drain and raising it 300 and tile's been blocked permanently, you'll get your wetland all right, but there might be a few people pretty annoyed. So I guess that's the dilemma for us. You know, it's
I suppose the wider
complex type of.
Yeah, I thought in the context of the Titara gates, it'll go through that consenting process.
I'm thinking about our need to, we're all talking about, we need more wetlands. You know, this is an ideal opportunity. Sure, it will affect leaseholders, but you know, we've got to bite the bullet at some stage, and if it's because it's on the land that we lease, that's an excellent opportunity in my view to make progress in this area. Because if we are going to tell people they need to put wetlands on their farms, they're going to say, oh well, yes, but that won't, you know, it'll take my land out of production. So if we are reluctant to do that on our land, how are we going to persuade other people to do it on their land?
It's a very good point. So I suppose my response to that is and been raised before, the leadership on our own land programme will look at a whole range of factors to consider for our lease land, which would be land drainage, but also ecological biodiversity and stuff. So that's so all the more reason to get an update of leading on our lease land back to this committee.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, is that we can't go around town telling people what they should be doing. We need to be, you know, leading that too, like you're saying, Paul. So we'll make a final question for John and then we'll move on.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So yeah, supporting, I guess this was alluding to before with my questions, probably just wasn't clarifying as clear. And I suppose, you know, we talked about private land being affected. Is there an opportunity to shift the gates to try and do what Morris is talking about, but also look after the private land, or is that the only site that's feasible?
Well, I suppose you could build levees or something, but I mean, look, I mean, if it raises as 300, it's not going to make the wetland you think it's going to make. It's just going to, the drains that are already in place, it's going to raise the level. And part of what we were suggesting in line with what we know is, you know, deepen some of those drains back and actually have your carracks and things in there so they can actually lay their eggs. So I don't think it's going to be a wetland the way you might think it's going to be. It's just going to be a raise in the level of the drainage. So I think that's quite misleading. And we've got a lot of other wetland further down there that's been put into wetland as well. So I don't think it's going to be quite the way you picture it. I could be wrong.
I'm seeing that. Look, I'm just wondering, we can find someone to note that item. Anyone to see it, please?
Yeah.
Lyndall. All those in favour?
Aye.
Yes. Karen. Thanks very much. Of course, you stay right there. I don't think you're moving, eh? You've got another item. Item 6. Really? Or do you want to?
No, this is usually just yeah.
Okay, you can dismiss.
Taking the red unless there are any questions.
I'll move it.
Okay. Anyone to second, please? That's all. All in favour? No. Right, item number 7, our integrated catchment management report. Okay, have we got anyone to speak?
Free to go, fellas.
Yeah, sorry about that, boss.
Here we go. Straight to stage.
Kia ora katoa, ko Ella Wengwa. I'm the team leader for the Awharima and Waio catchments and the catchment integration team. So we're here today to share maybe a slightly different perspective on the projects that and programs we're carrying out, and that's by a geographical perspective in the Waio. Obviously delivering catchment integration management across the Waio freshwater management unit. So I'm here on behalf of my team, so Nicola Bullen, who is in Awharima, and Jessica Agate, who's actually the LSO officer for the Waio and pulled this presentation together. So just briefly going to go over the catchment integration management and what that is, and in just giving a few examples of what's happening across the Waio. This is non-exhaustive, but very much a high-level overview. In particular, some of what we're covering has actually just been covered by a couple of the other presentations, so I'll put more emphasis on that catchment integration perspective. So just reminding you that catchment integration across is about a holistic and integrated approach to the management of land, biodiversity, water and community resources at the catchment scale. It's very much about our mission of Haora and achieving Kuta Katai and how crucial that is with regard to our objectives. Working closely and aligning our projects with the values and outcomes of the mana whenua, and obviously, as we've talked a lot about in the last presentations, our desires for our communities. Very much the outcomes need to be across organisation and interdisciplinary, as well as multi-agency approach to a lot of these projects, and that's what makes them integrated to achieve those broad, holistic, integrated outcomes that we talked about before. So one of the aspects that we are to report on for our team is around the freshwater management unit outcomes. And as you'll see on the left, those for the freshwater, and on the right are for the coastal environment. So the waters of the Waio catchment, Te Waiwai Lagoon, and the coastal waters will be restored to a state of whole water and healthy resilience by 2045 to the fullest extent possible for the benefit of current and future generations, whilst acknowledging the operation of the Manapuri hydroelectric generation scheme. And then on the right, very much the same for the benefit of future current and future generations. So along with our freshwater outcomes, we also have obviously our biodiversity outcomes, biosecurity, not so much air quality and in the Waio catchment, but also obviously climate adaptation. Some of the challenges for the Waio are very much, in particular, our sediment and E. coli issues. But also it's a vastly geographic region with low population, and also obviously we have some pretty major stakeholders in that catchment with regard to DOG, but also LINZ and our relationships with those partners. So just moving on to a couple of the projects I wanted to talk about. So then obviously this is a program across the region, but specific to the Waio, this is led by biodiversity and biosecurity, obviously, but often the catchment integration team play a role part in terms of talking to landowners about this project, and often working with community groups as well. So for the 23-24 financial year, there have been 3 approved EEF projects for the Waio. and these include a combination of fencing native habitat for stock exclusion, native planting, plant pest control, and pest mammal control. So the example up on the screen there is actually the Te Waio Mahinga Kai Trust is doing a project in the Jericho Stream area on the western side of the Takatimu Mountains. So they're receiving funding from the Environmental Enhancement Fund for their extensive planting program. We actually just had Ellie touch on this in reasonable detail from her report, but just highlighting some of the work in the particular areas across the Waio. So the Jobs for Nature funding in terms of the Fiordland buffer, Buddleia removal in Red Cliffs in the Divide, Gunneria and Blue Cliffs. It is Blue Cliffs, isn't it? Yeah, sorry, apologies, mistaken. Obviously the check, clean, dry across the Lagos and for lagrosiphon risk in the lakes and ongoing surveillance, ongoing possum control area program and the wilding conifers in particular around the Takatimus. So extensive work done through the biosecurity team and often, might be involved in conversations around those things and here to support at any time. Very topical at the moment, the Blue Cliffs situation. So there was a meeting just recently held out there for the NamSUS catchment integration team. It's pollution prevention, but also the community engagement aspect of often, being involved with a number of the stakeholders that are involved in these sorts of discussions. Collaborating with Southland District Council, obviously, as an ongoing discussion. We were going to go with that. And the Tuatapere Flood Bank ownership, another area that we have quite a lot of involvement is with the catchment liaison committees, and that was a key topic that was involved in the AGM just recently or a few months ago. Again, an ongoing topic. Specific to the Waio, the Riparian Fencing Fund, so this applies across all E-class land and came out of the 1996 Waio Agreement. So it helps to cover fencing, labour, material costs associated with protecting riparian areas. Private lands eligible for 50% cover through the Living Streams Fund after works are complete. So they show us that they've completed the work and then we can help fund 50% of that. So the last financial year, over 3,000 metres of fencing was completed. And this season we actually hoped, we carried a bit of the budget over, so we're hoping for more like 6,000 metres of fencing with about 50k spent in that area. So this is a picture of the one of the projects that was completed of an ephemeral waterway, completed in the 21-22 season. So as with across the rest of the region, lots of involvement with catchment groups through our partnership, our relationship with Thriving Southland as well. And we also work specifically with catchment group leads. So on the left, you've got the Lower Waio group. We've been involved with them for a stream walk earlier this year. Also a number of the other divisions, so particularly water, the monitoring team came along. They had a great day out on the Lilburn stream. And then on the right, actually, this is the Arawia catchment group. So they had a project looking at erosion mitigations in several different locations, understanding the geology, prioritising and defining solutions to sediment and E. coli specific to the Arawia catchment. So that actually takes us on to what we hope will be a pilot for the Hill Country Erosion Fund. So we've gone back to and got additional funding from MPI for this project. So the aim is to complete a erosion control strategy, but one of the aspects we included in that were to have a pilot. So given the work that the Arawia have been doing through the Thriving Southland funded projects, we've gone and offered an opportunity to the Arawia catchment group to be involved as a pilot group for this project. So we've got funding set aside to help
identify what that project might look like, what possible mitigations we might want to trial. And then we've actually got operations money, which is rare and unique in Ogden, to actually go out and do some stuff on land with them. So it's up to them. They get to sort of highlight the areas that of most interest and actually where they see this funding might be most valuable. Obviously, the outcomes of this pilot will be looked at as how to inform mitigations across the region. So what's the learnings from that, as well as actually the engagement process and conversations that we have with the catchment groups. Finally, very briefly, the WIO aspect to the program, the South Riparian program. So yeah, we've had some good plantings across in the WIO. Again, there's not a lot, there hasn't been as much of an uptake in this current year. So we've got more of a push. It is a bit of a challenge with the WIO because it's so vast and not as densely populated. Engagement's not always maybe as easy. You'll see there's only 2 catchment groups and a catchment where many others, there's a lot more, it's a lot denser. So just need to make more of an effort to get out and collaborate with those stakeholders. Finally, I won't touch on this too much. Fiona has already gone into it, but really just it's the Home Creek project is very much around, yes, improving water quality, but in creating space to engage with community and create those partnerships with stakeholders. So it's an opportunity to create a focal point within the WIO. It's doing some really great work, particularly I think the onboarding of Fiordland College is a really exciting opportunity in an area where we haven't had as much engagement and would like more. So it's exciting. So happy to answer any questions.
Well, it's a pretty busy report too. There's a heck of a lot going on over there, isn't there, really? The erosion, I'll just start off while everyone collects their thoughts. The erosion project, that seems quite interesting. I know up in the North Island, there, you know, when you travel up there in some of those sodden areas, you just look up in the hills and there's just slips everywhere. The land seems to be taking off. And there's talk around using trees, poplars and that to, and then entering them into the Missions Trading Scheme. We only need 30% canopy cover to qualify, I think, Morris, don't you, to the Missions Trading Scheme. So there could be, it'd be interesting to see what that group comes up with their initial thinking this month anyway. So
As I recognise that vote of that erosion is reasonably recent.
yeah. Any other questions? Morris?
Just a couple of observations about that. The mudstone in the lower reaches of the Arawi are clearly a bit of an issue, but further upstream it goes through a bit of limestone, and then coming off Mount Linton Station, for example, it's not mudstone as far as I'm aware. Are there issues in relation to those areas for E. coli in the river? That's the main issue, I think, in that part of it anyway. Is that right? There's land, because that's a really big farm in the headwaters of the Arawi. Are they involved at all?
So we have offered this opportunity to the Arawi catchment group. We haven't actually heard back. We are optimistic, given their previous interest. So, so we don't know who's specifically involved, and it'll be up to the group to potentially identify where some of those mitigations take place. We've had a number of reports done on sediment and erosion across Southland, and it hasn't yet been aligned with our E. coli results as well. So I guess really this is part of the plan of needing to put together a sediment or erosion strategy, and then also looking at some of those other values that by reducing sediment loss, what other values can we also achieve, such as reducing E. coli, and that's very much going to need to be part of that strategy of how we integrate benefits.
The Arawi, if I may, is a very good trout fishery, and that's a reflection of the fact that it is, despite having it's a very dirty looking river in the winter time especially, but in the summer it's not so bad. There's a lot of good gravel in it, and there's a lot of willow trees on the margin. Some need to be trimmed up, but yeah, from a trout fishing point of view, it really is a good fishery, and that sort of suggests that there are some good things about it from a quality point of view, because they wouldn't be living there if it was really poor. The other question I wanted to ask was about Dirimo. You haven't mentioned Dirimo as a biosecurity issue, but in my opinion, it is a very big issue in the Wairau. The upper Wairau has it very badly. It's very difficult to manage it in the upper Wairau, and the lower Wairau, it's better from a management point of view because you can alter the flows a bit. But I would have thought that Dirimo is something that we really should be thinking a bit about. It's what we've been trying to manage it in the lower Wairau with Meridian by providing variation of flows and that sort of thing. But it's from a biodiversity point of view, it's really quite significant.
So it is on our radar as biosecurity, but it's an MPI, national MPI project. So we contribute through to the Check Clean Dry program. So Check Clean Dry is probably our best defence against the movement of Dirimo and other freshwater pests between catchments and around catchments. So we contribute to that every year, and we have an ambassador and advocate that goes out and talks to people at fishing ramps and anywhere we can go and talk to people and try and work on that Check Clean Dry message. But yeah, so it's definitely something that we do see as important, but it is an MPI led.
Good, thanks, Shelley. Nickel.
Yeah, so just a little bit more history on the area. The Whale Catchment Group did fund some research onto the very high E. coli levels a few years ago because they wanted to know where it was coming from. It's quite an interesting. It's a very steep-sided catchment, but it starts right up from Rivers Park. We've got sedimentation coming up probably from coal mines. I'm not quite whether there's a contribution from the Ojai septic type situation. I'm not too sure, but it's one that nobody's really managed to come up with a silver bullet because of the fast runoff. I think riparian planting is probably going to be something that could make a difference, and that erosion stuff would be also would be useful. But even the local community are pretty keen to find out why, because it is one of the outliers in that whole thing for a coal mine. Yeah.
Quite often in the upper catchments, they do have high E. coli readings, mainly because that's where you find the large sheep farms up there, and that's just the reality of it. But it's not the end of the world. Like, there is significant mitigations that you can employ just through farm management too, I think, and control, because it is overland flow, that sort of thing. So look, one question from Jeremy, and then I think we might
just a quick, there's a wee bit of discussion around in the public or around the rural area in regards to obviously with the NPS for Indigenous biodiversity now, in regards to riparian planting, even the Environment Enhancement Fund, you know, when farmers are actually putting new plantings in now, and their actual legal ramifications maybe in the future when they get deemed as a significant natural area, and then you may have different management around those plots within your farm, albeit when you planted them, that's just something I'm looking after doing for a specific thing. Obviously we need to, I think there's going to be a lot of questions asked about what that the NPS actually means to the farm now, but there's legislation which it is. We may get a wee bit of pushback from people wanting to farm, because all of a sudden it may change the whole scope of land use in that where those plantings are being planted. Now, whether that's right or not, I'm just saying there isn't talk about that out there, and so it's good to know from our point of view, do we have an obligation to, when people are planting, to actually know what that means to their operation maybe in the future. That's all. It's just asking.
So we're still working through the details of the NPS survey and exactly what it means, but the intent is very much around the protection of remnants and Indigenous things, and it's got really strict criteria about what can and can't be an SNA. And I think from my current reading, and advice might change, but it would be very hard that a planting is going to trigger those criteria, because it needs to be representative of the original ecosystem, or it needs to be particularly rare and all sorts of things. So there may be cases when a particularly good planting of a particular age can become an SNA, or it may be that a farmer chooses that they want it to get that extra layer of protection. But the starting point is that is around protecting the really good remnants that we've got left. And there's also things around existing use rights. So, you know, grazing being able to continue in some areas as long as it's not damaging the area. So lots of things we need to work through. We need to make sure we understand it really well, so we're getting really, really good advice. But I don't think it's something that we need to be worried about when it comes to planting, but we can definitely take that.
But that's the thing we need to clarify, because we don't want people to stop doing it.
Yeah, no,
Because I've got a feeling this is going to actually.
Rightio, well, look, if we can find someone to note that report. Thanks, Eric. Someone to second Lyndall, those in favour, against, carried. Thank you, Ella. Very good. We'll move on to the next one, which is intensive winter grazing update. Thanks, Fiona.
I'm gonna run away.
Rightio. I've got my eye on the clock,
Yeah,
4 o'clock at their time, so we're just gonna.
This is a presentation, we're very quick. It's
Yep.
just that it's on our work program to update you in a reasonably sequenced way. So this is this. I'm sure, Fiona, you can get through this quickly.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you. So through you, Mr. Chairman. Just a very quick update on our intensive winter grazing activities. First photo here is just actually reminding us what we're all about here, doing the right thing in terms of our winter grazing practices for Southland and ensuring that we're encouraging and getting people in the right space. We know farmers are continuing to make a sustained progress towards that full adoption of good practices. We know the NES regulations are operative this year, which has been a little shift, and we know there's a connection between the NES and proposed Southland Water and plan, in fact, plan change to Otahi. We've already talked about the connection between advice and information, monitoring, enforcement, and our authorising environment, and all of those things are how we work together internally to achieve outcomes. Consents obviously continue to receive a small number of both consents and DPA applications. We in Southland have about 100 applications in total, and relatively speaking, the numbers are low across the country. I know consents have been involved, as have we, in terms of providing some support to people who have received abatement notices. So one of the pathways to kind of have that notice lifted is to go through the consent process. So that then we are supporting Bruce's team are processing those applications within the statutory timeframes. Obviously, compliance, you'll be familiar with our work we've done. So this additional proactive advice and education, the aerial flights, and obviously we know the follow-ups were completed. There are further aerial flights to be happening as per previous seasons. Low numbers of calls via that pollution hotline, which is a positive story, and ongoing meetings with MPI to align the work program in terms of animal health and the welfare issues alongside the environment issues. So that's again a really positive stakeholder relationship. From an advice and information, obviously we've attended a number of catchment group and industry field days. We continue to provide that regulatory support from a consent process / farm plans and a compliance perspective. Our proactive engagement is, as I called it the other day, maturing in terms of having been involved now. I say year 2, but I can't help but think it's year 3. So that's the work we do in December, January, February around helping farmers to be ready for winter grazing and having a good awareness of the risks and issues they face and planning ahead. We're doing a review of that work. So every year we sort of look back on what we've done and how it went. And again, as I've mentioned already today, the ongoing land management conversation in terms of those technical issues and helping farmers to do the right thing. And that is my presentation. On behalf of
That was pretty good, Fiona. Eric.
I'll just point out that right now there's a few challenges out there with weather as it is. I have not seen anything that would compromise animal welfare in any way, but we are in a very difficult time, and some farmers are having an even more difficult time than others. And I just think that they're all doing their best, and I just think we should be good at that, given the conditions underfoot that are out there at the moment.
Anyone else? No.
There's no thanks to that report, and having been through Canterbury, I'm not sure that there's helicopter flights or is surveillance of all the areas that we've had involved. So we are still leading the charge. I was surprised that the Otago Regional Council received an award the other night for intensive winter grazing, and everybody sort of looked at the table and said, "Oh, that was you guys." So I'm sure that invitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and I'm sure they'll share it with us and all the other groups that actually gave a consistent message over the last 3 or 4 years to get us to where we are now.
Thanks, Morris.
Sorry to have to say this, but recently Bill Morrison sent out a paper which was prepared by McDowell and others, all NIWA scientists and ag research scientists. And they looked at all the things that farmers could do to reduce nitrate, phosphorus and sediment runoff. I'm looking at the graph that they've got in their paper now. And the thing that contributes most to the reduction of those 3 things getting to streams is off-paddock winter grazing. That's the most important thing. So we are not, in my opinion, and from reading this stuff, it doesn't seem that we are likely to be able to reach our goals of Pairora unless the amount of winter grazing that occurs in the region is substantially reduced. Because even though these are good things that we're doing, you're still not going to stop those 3 contaminants getting into our streams completely. And having them off on hard structures or in winter barns in the winter time is what is needed to achieve those gains.
So they're related to slope, are they?
Well, it's related to slope of phosphorus and sediment.
Yes.
So on free draining ground, a nitrate gets into the groundwater because of various factors that operate in the wintertime, the grass growing and all those sorts of things that you know about. So,
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough, John.
Yeah, just to apply that, yeah, I get where you're coming from. I think where we go the long-term plan is going to see system changes. But we have to be mindful, we don't talk about we want people to fix stuff. We don't generate and go, oh, but hang on, the concrete's we're going to smack it with emissions over concrete use. So we've got to be careful if we don't push one thing and then 10 years later turn around and smack it with something else. So I'm just mindful, but I do believe what you're talking is something that farmers will get to with our long-term plan. We've done water quality anyway. So
Yeah, I just want to respond to Morris because what he's saying has, real resonance of what the issue is. And as someone who has built 2 off-paddock wintering things over the years, the first hiccup you come to is the bank manager, which says, no, you don't need to do that. No. And, so finance is extraordinarily difficult. And I can also say there's a 40% saving on feed if you farm off. If animals are warm and they're not walking, and there's no food wastage, that's just about an offset for building it. The second thing, having sold 2 farms that have had off-farm wintering on them, the real estate agents and the bankers say, this is worth nothing. You don't value that at all. And, if we want this to happen, there's got to be a magnitude of shift by the financing and the real estate people. Otherwise, people are just going to bang their head on the wall when they set out to actually do it.
not saying it easy, I'm just saying that.
Yeah, no, fair enough, but I'm just saying, is there something we should be doing that's a little bit wider than the farming community if we want this to be an accepted practice?
I think if I just comment that your opening comment that you said, I'm sorry to say this, and that's that problem. Sometimes we don't like to talk about these things, but it's important that you made that point there and we had that interaction. Jeremy.
Yeah, we'll have a good session on the some stage, Morris. But the reality is, like, it's a lot easier for cattle than sheep. Doing off farm, it becomes quite a numbers thing. And it's pretty hard. But I'm not disagreeing with you. But I think personally, there's more organic ways. Wood chip and all these sort of things that we have plenty of in South, and they could be a pathway to some aspect of getting them off. More to the point, it may be getting them off on the certain days. It's about that 10 days that are really bad in South and that have horrendous. And to be honest, this year we've seen them, especially up their way, that no matter where you put the stock, it's not the best. Plan A, B, C, D, you can carry on right down the alphabet. Doesn't work too well. So, but actually it's saying, gosh, it would have been good to have somewhere just to throw the cattle on shelter bounds on the wood chips. So something pretty sort of temporary, but not overly regulated. It's just for those better to be there than on the paddock. But then you have feed issues, just even all these stickers. I think that it's quite complicated. It's not as simple as can, but we've got to look at things.
With these other conversations we're having, it's going to work itself out.
The other things, if you want to add anything? So look, I think this is a really good conversation. We're having in a multitude of areas across the entity, aren't we? The winter grazing. So I just finish on that. I just want to say on Eric's point, just be we're mindful of the right now at the right time. You know, we're all driving in and out today. We're seeing what's going on. So look, I just find someone to move that report if they could. Thanks, John, and someone to second, Jeremy. All those in favour?
Aye.
Yes, carried. Thanks very much, Fiona. We'll move on to the next item. That's from you, Paul.
Or you can take the integrated catchment management group work plans as read. This is just highlights to you what's on the calendar for future regional services committee meetings. You've had the YO presentation today. I've had the incentive integration presentation. So next up in October, you'll get, I think we've got a slight typo there. I think that will be not the Matara, the probably Aparima presentation, and there'll also be a gravel management activity update for the next meeting.
So you
Very good. All those in favour? It's carried. Thanks very much, Paul. We'll move into the Department of Conservation Bureau update. Phil's not here, so I don't know what we can do about that. If there isn't one, so we're not going to bother. Urgency, extraordinary and urgent business, none to note. Do we need to pass that? Nothing. Okay, let's move into public excluded, and Michaela, you might want to tell us why we need to do this or what we should.
So we're moving into public excluded to enable any local authority holding the information to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities, and also to protect the privacy of natural persons, including that of deceased natural persons.